Hey everyone, welcome to Apostolic Proof. This page is all about you learning, applying, and sharing God's Word. Today we're going to take a look at one of the foundations of the Christian faith, and that is the oneness of God. And we're going to see how the Bible explains the oneness of God and how it doesn't explain the Trinitarian doctrine. So everything that I say is not going to be based on opinion or what I believe in. It's going to be based solely on scriptures straight out of the Bible. So I hope you'll join me as we take a look at this. In no way, shape, or form am I going to try and sound fancy. I'm just going to read scriptures. That's all. So to begin with, let's take a look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, which says, "But without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him." The part that's bolded says, "He that cometh to God must believe that he is." Faith is an understanding of who God is. And when we look at oneness, or the reason why it's important to look at oneness, is because it is so important to understand the God that we serve. In John, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. And the Word was made flesh, and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. This is he," and now this is John the Baptist speaking, "of whom I said, After me cometh a man which is preferred before me, for he was before me." Now, there's a lot in these scriptures, so to go through them briefly. First, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Verse 14 says, "And the Word was made flesh." If the Word was God, and then the Word was made flesh, that means God was made flesh. And the flesh in this instance is referring to Jesus Christ. There's our very first instance of the oneness of God. God himself robed himself in flesh and became Jesus. They're not distinct. God himself did this. Second, it says, "He was in the world. He came into his own received him not. The world knew him not." These verses are actually talking about God, and yet they sound as if they're referring to Jesus, because the world was made by him. God did that. And then it says, "After me cometh a man which is preferred before me, for he was before me." John the Baptist here is talking of Jesus. Even though Jesus was born after me, John the Baptist is saying he's preferred before me, for he was before me. Now, how can someone born after be already in existence beforehand, unless they are God? Now we have in John chapter 5, "Therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him, because he not only had broken the Sabbath, but said also that God was his Father, making himself equal with God, that all men should honor the Son even as they honor the Father. He that honoreth not the Son honoreth not the Father which hath sent him." This verse here is interesting, because how could Jesus say that all men should honor the Son even as they honor the Father? Isaiah 42:8 says, "I am the Lord, that is my name, and my glory will I not give to another, neither my praise to graven images." In the Old Testament, the Israelites knew that they served one God, and that they were not to give their glory to any other God or any other image, object, or person. So here Jesus is saying in the New Testament, you should honor me and give me all the same glory that God has. How can one expect that unless they are God? This is another proof that Jesus is God and that they are not separate. Chapter 6 verse 33 says, "For the bread of God is he which cometh down from heaven and giveth life unto the world." The bread of God is he which cometh down from heaven. Jesus came from heaven and giveth life unto the world. Now, if God gives life unto the world and Jesus gives life unto the world, they can't be competing. They have to be the same. Moving to chapter 8, it says, "Then said the Jews unto him, Thou art not yet 50 years old, And hast thou seen Abraham? Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. Here's another incident. Just as John said that Jesus existed before him, though born afterwards, here are the Jews saying, You're not even 50 years old. And have you seen Abraham? And Jesus said, Before Abraham was, I am. The same God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that appeared to Moses, saying, Tell Pharaoh that the I am sent you, is the same God talking to these Jews, saying, Before Abraham was, I am. How can Jesus make a statement unless he is God? They can't be separate. Over to chapter 10, it says, My Father which gave them me is greater than all, and no man is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand. I and my Father are one. What I love about this verse is that this is almost as explicit as it gets. Jesus openly stated, I and my Father are one. If you look at the word one or words related to one, like unicycle, the prefix, or I'm not an English major, so I'll just go with prefix. Uni, which means one. And then you look at the word tricycle and tri, which means three. How can one say that a tricycle is the same as a unicycle, knowing that a tricycle, tri, has 3 wheels, and a unicycle, uni, has 1 wheel? You can't say that those are the same, that those are like the same form of transportation. That's the exact same way we have to look at oneness versus Trinitarianism. If Jesus said, I and my Father are one, how can we get 3 out of the word one? Over in verse 33 it says, The Jews answered him, saying, For good work we stone thee not, but for blasphemy. Because that thou, being a man, makest thyself God. The Jews even understood, though they did not accept, that Jesus was in essence saying, Look at me, I'm God. And because of that, they did not accept him because the Jews knew there was only one God. And they were not willing to accept the fact that Jesus was that same God. And by saying that Jesus and God are separate persons, people who believe that are also not admitting that Jesus is that same God and that they are one. The Jews grew up on this principle here. Deuteronomy 6 verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Why would God in the Old Testament push so heavily on the fact that he is just one and that there is no other, and yet in the New Testament all of a sudden split himself into 3? We have to realize that God does not change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. If God was one in the Old Testament, he's one in the New Testament. He chose to reveal himself as Jesus Christ, but Jesus is not separate of who he is. Going to chapter 14 and 7, it says, If ye had known me, you should have known my Father also. And from henceforth ye know him, and have seen him. Jesus is saying to his disciples, if you have seen me, you have seen God. Verse 9, Jesus said unto him, Have I been so long time with you, and yet hast thou not known me, Philip? He that hath seen me hath seen the Father. And how sayest thou then, Show us the Father? Like, if you were to take this verse and apply it to those who believe that Jesus and God are separate, you could almost say the same thing. Has Jesus been so long time with you, and yet you don't know him to be God? If you have seen Jesus or have had an encounter with Jesus, you have had an encounter with God. So how can you say that Jesus and God are separate? Chapter 15, verse 5 says, I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me ye can do nothing. And this last phrase is what's so important. For without me ye can do nothing. This is Jesus saying, without me, you can't do anything. God can make this exact same statement. Without me, you can't do anything. So if Jesus and God if they were separate, how could we go to God in order to do everything, and then the next day go to Jesus in order to do everything? They don't share responsibilities. They are one. Without God or without Jesus, which is synonymous, we can't do anything. Chapter 16 says, "Now are we sure that thou knowest all things, and needest not that any man should ask thee. By this we believe that thou comest forth from God." Chapter 17 says, "And now, O Father, glorify thou me with thine own self, with the glory which I had with thee before the world was." Chapter 17 here, this is Jesus praying. And he's praying to God saying, "Glorify thou me with thine own self, with the glory which I had with thee before the world was." And there's two parts to this. The first part, Jesus is asking for the same glory that God has. We already read in Isaiah that God does not share his glory with anyone but himself. Therefore, Jesus would, if he was separate, would have no right to ask for the glory that God has. But since we know Jesus and God to be one, and not part of some group of three, Jesus could ask for the glory that God has. Second, it says, "which I had with thee before the world was." Jesus again is making known that he existed before the creation of the world. And the only person we know to have done that is God. Jesus therefore must be God. Chapter 20 it says, "And Thomas answered and said unto him, My Lord and my God." If Jesus was not God, Jesus would have corrected Thomas and said, "You cannot call me God." But that didn't happen. Thomas was allowed to say, or allowed to call Jesus, "My Lord and my God." If Jesus is God, they are not three separate entities. They are one. As a summary, all of these are the scriptures we read. The Word was God, the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. God was made flesh, not some separate entity from God that was already flesh. No, God himself became flesh. He was in the world, and the world was made by him. He was before John the Baptist, even though he was born afterwards. Jesus made himself equal with God, because the only one who can do that is God himself. Jesus said that he should receive the same honor God receives, and we know that God does not share his honor with any other person or object other than himself. Jesus said he came down from heaven, and yet we know that he was born on earth. Only God can do that. He existed before Abraham. Jesus and God being one existed before Abraham. And the most important probably on this list is Jesus explicitly stating that he and the Father are one. Jesus did not say, "I've come from the Father, and me plus the Holy Ghost and God exist as three separate beings who you should worship." No, he said, "I and my Father are one." The disciples have seen God by seeing Jesus. Jesus made that very clear. Jesus also said that we can't do anything without him, and if we can't do anything without God either, they must be the same. He came forth from God, and he had glory with God before the world was created, and God does not share his glory. Lastly, Thomas was allowed to say, and we are allowed to say to Jesus, "My Lord and my God." Jesus is God, and the oneness doctrine cannot coexist with the Trinitarian doctrine. They are not three, they are just one. And I pray this video has given you scriptural evidence and proof as to why it is. God bless you.